Hello, everyone. Mr. Nobody here, bringing you another episode of Making Nobody Happy. And if you're wondering why I've done some of these in a strange location, this is my daughter's room. Um, One of my favorite chairs was moved in here recently when we were rearranging my daughter's beds, and a lot of our house is currently busy right now because a Zelda themed birthday party is being put together in various places. So I'm finding my way around to other locations. In case you're wondering what I'm wearing here, it's an angry Donald Duck shirt. So very cool. And if you don't know this from some of my book reviews, Donald Duck was my favorite fictional character when I was a kid. But that's not what I'm going to talk about at all today. Today I want to talk about Mad Max Fury Road. I'm not going to do a review of it, except to say it's a great action movie. It's a ton of fun. It's a modern classic, but everyone knows that. Very striking, a return to a sort of classic form. I grew up, in the 80s and 90s, and we had so many good movies come out then. And, a lot of us did grow up with Mad Max, and it was fun to come back to it. From a director who the most recent things I'd been enjoying from him were mostly about talking pigs and penguins and things like that. So I'm not going to get too deep into that movie and talk about why it's great or why it isn't. It's a great, fun movie. But I do want to talk about some of the meanings that I actually take from it. I will say I even showed an edited version of it to my 10-year-old daughter. She thought it was fun. We were a little careful about what we watched. We just sort of skipped through the highlights. The one slightly more violent bit I did let her see was I did let her see the death of Immortan Joe because, that's a climax. That's what it's all for. You're waiting to see him get it. Anyway, let me talk to you a little bit about why I like this movie and what I actually get from it. So I think one reason that I actually like Fury Road is that it shows us in such extreme and fun ways, and also horrible ways, what we could be. Yes, people can be that awful. The awfulness of Fury Road is not really that fictional. People really can be like that. Men can really descend to that level, and it's not just they can be awful, but they can be really good at being awful, particularly when the world becomes that sort of place where the ruthless are favored, where it is to your advantage to not play by the rules or to just be the toughest, most abusive, most horrible, manipulative person around. Like, harsh conditions can make us all turn on one another. The strong prey on the weak, and everyone just seeks their own good at the expense of others. Now, in those situations, whoever can wield enough power will find a way to exploit the lives of others. We know we're capable of this, and it really wouldn't take that much to put us into that situation. So, the War Boys, they're being used by Immortan Joe. The War Boys lived short and brutal lives and were exploited for what their deaths could buy the villains. And the wives were exploited for what their lives could bring the villains. So one was exploited for their lives, the other one was exploited for their deaths. Max was exploited as a resource by Nox. No one had a happy fate. Everyone was just trying to use everyone else as much as possible. So, but here's where things changed, and this is what I liked and why I say this is actually a positive movie. So, given something worthwhile to live for and die for, the war by Nox actually showed who he was, who he could be, and how what he was could actually be used for good, not just for exploitation. Who he was could, and even his death could be used to protect and to preserve and to sacrifice to save others, even to save Max, someone who he'd had this fraught relationship with. They spent a certain amount of time abusing or trying to kill each other or blow off each other's arms. Now, what caused this change in Knox, where he suddenly found something that he was already willing to die for something, but for something terrible, and then he changed? it was the kindness and the beauty of the wives, not just beauty in a strictly physical sense. It was larger than that. It's more symbolic than that. It's this aesthetic vision of goodness and purity and life. And seeing that among the wives inspired him. It helped him see a better idea of being than he had known or he had had up to that point. And he was willing to give himself up for it. He dies to make it happen. He blocks their pursuit, and causes this spectacular going out in glory. Now, Furiosa and Max both start out, they're mostly out for themselves, especially earlier in their timelines. They're just out to survive. Furiosa and Math are both characters who are very strong and very ruthless in their own way, and they use their strength and ruthlessness to survive. They pursued their own survival and their own good, forgetting other people. But then they were both haunted by their choices and their failures, and they had failed to find peace or satisfaction in just mere survival. Their strength wasn't serving anything worthwhile, and they could tell it wasn't serving life or hope. It was only furthering and prolonging their own pain and the pain of others. Um, Now, Immortan Joe, he was an awful villain because he had an ability to just align everyone and everything around him as his possessions and to exploit them just purely for his own personal selfish gain with no regard for their value. Like, nothing to him was of any value except insofar as it gave value to him. The mothers, the wives, the war boys, the rabble, even Knox's failed attempt to give his own life for Joe only merited a dismissive mediocre from Joe when it doesn't quite go right. So Immortan Joe made himself God. The whole universe was just there for his personal pleasure and gain. And he violated the fundamental rules of virtuous masculinity, traditional virtuous masculinity, that strength isn't for yourself, it's for others. He used his strength for himself, and he used the strength of others for himself. He made the whole world a nightmare by subverting the purpose and true power of being given the gift of strength. Now, in their own ways, Max and Furiosa, in a similarly harsh world, made similar choices. Being very strong, they used their strength for themselves, although they didn't quite as much seek to devour and use the strength of others too and prey on them in quite the same way. Not that they weren't willing to do some pretty tough things. But then both of them had a change of heart, and they both sought redemption from this state that they had been in. They decided to use their strength to help and to protect and to serve others, to serve and to protect. And suddenly the world started working again, and their souls started to come back to life again. They started connecting to people again. They started to be inspired. They started to understand what their strength was for and what could really do. It wasn't for devouring like Joe, and it wasn't for just survival like in their past lives. It was for the help and protection and betterment of others. Now, Immortan Joe's world was a terrible one because it reduced all of humanity to just mere property. Men, women, children, everything. Everything was property to him. He never gave anything, he only took. Even his giving was a way to take, to enslave, like he did with the water and the rabble. Even his blessings on the deaths of the war boys was just a very clever extended way to take from them, a way to make them die for his uncaring pleasure and benefit. His giving of luxuries and safety of food and water to the wives was a way to be able to take from them. In all of these cases, he trapped people by offering them things that they needed, not as a gift, not as generosity, not as his own expense, but purely for his own selfish purposes, purely as a way to control them and make them depend on him without admitting any need or any debt of his own. It was a completely one-way relationship. It had no reciprocal nature to it. He never had to give up anything of himself. And it contained that approach had power because it's a kind of human relationship, but it's this terrible twisted perversion of human relationships in the way that they work between leaders and the people, between husbands and wives, between commanders and soldiers, between fathers and children. It's like this horrible, horrible nightmare demon version of it. Now, the problem is he turned the whole world into this horrible nightmare apocalyptic vision of itself. It's not just that the world is wrecked uh, in a technical sense of, yeah, there's been a war, there's all this catastrophe. It's been wrecked in a human sense. The world of human relationships is destroyed. And the problem is, well, how do you fix that? Like, it's not enough to just destroy more things. You can't solve the way the human world is wrecked just by evening the scales and saying, okay, no one has to give. Everyone's going to be a taker. Everyone's going to be as tough and as out for themselves as Joe. Everything and everyone will be like Joe. We'll all be closed-fisted, never risking anything, never giving up anything. All of us as equally independent little gods. I mean, even if that could work somehow, the idea of the world of human existence as all these independent competing citadels, even if you could make that work somehow, it wouldn't make us safe or good or happy. We don't all need to become like Joe. That's not the message of the movie. We don't all need to become mutual exploiters. What changed things in this movie was when people were willing to give, to truly give. Um, that's what perverts the act of possession, not being willing to also be possessed, to also give yourself completely. You can't possess someone by force without subverting your own nature and just twisting your soul and destroying them, perverting the nature of relationships. You can't possess someone by force without undermining the nature and dignity of humanity, and that's what Joe was doing to everyone. But we can give ourselves willingly to and for one another in a way that actually elevates us, brings us closer, and ennobles us. Uh, you can't fix the broken world by just saying we're all going to pull back. No one has to give anything. Like that's not love. Love can't be safe, and it can't be only about taking or only about receiving. Like love, it isn't love unless you are giving. And sometimes a little giving can start to change someone, like it did with Knox. That's what happened there. Just a little love, a little kindness, a little mercy, a little risk, a little understanding was given to him, and he saw the vision and he was ready to give everything for it. So it was transformative, it's not like, he went through his regret, his disappointment, his disillusionment. He was emptied out by it, but it's not like he just went on and then become this cynical, well, I'm not going to be such a dummy as to ever care about anything again. No, someone was actively kind to him, actively showed mercy and understanding and love to him, and all of a sudden it opened up a whole new world for him, and it started to heal things for him. It started to heal what was broken inside him and in their whole world. You started to see what it could be. So there are many ways that you could understand Fury Road as a story of the triumph of the weak over the strong, the triumph of mothers and women over men and boys. But those, if you really think about it, the boys were being horrifically exploited themselves in most tragic ways, manipulated in their own ways to their death. So maybe that's incomplete. The weak over the strong, yeah, but also Furiosa and Max, they were strong too. So again, the strong one, maybe they were stronger and they just took over. Like I said, there's different ways you could see it. The weak over the strong, the triumph of the mothers over the boys, the triumph of civilization over barbarism. Um, all of those, I think, are just a little bit inadequate. They're not quite right. I think that if you deeply consider the movie, there's something actually more complex going on in this story, something less reductive. And I think if I had to sum it up and characterize the movie, it's the triumph of love over selfishness. Um, it's the triumph of this idea of charity, of just actually caring, because that's part of what's happened to Max. He's stopped caring, you know. And the villain, as I said, represents this almost ideal of every kind of positive relationship that could exist. He has transformed into pure exploitation and pure abuse and pure selfishness, with him not actually giving anything back. And what you're seeing is other people trying to just find a way out of that. Now, he doesn't get defeated just by being killed, because if the strong were just killed by some other strong, that doesn't really solve anything. And that's not what happened. It's not like one tyrant or one survivor is replaced by just another survivor, because you just say, oh, well, Immortan Joe is just figuring out the way to survive. It made them strong. It kept his people strong. It helped them survive in the wilderness. And he was trying to find a way to preserve some healthy version of humanity. And you know what? Might makes right, in the world that they're in, unpleasant as it is. From his perspective, he's just trying to survive. But that's not the kind of victory. That's not that victory doesn't take place in the movie. Like, the wives didn't win simply by becoming killers themselves. Max and Furiosa used their strength to achieve victory. Max, they fought for them. They risked themselves. They suffered for it. Um, and that's something Joe wasn't really willing to do. He wasn't willing to suffer. He certainly wasn't willing to suffer for the sake of others. And Knox is in many ways the greatest hero. Knox used his devotion to a vision that he knew he could never even live to see himself. He knew he wasn't going to live that long no matter what, because he has cancer. But he used his devotion to this vision of a better world of love and generosity to empower his strength for sacrifice, um, just as much at the end as at the beginning. He's still choosing to sacrifice himself, but it's got something better behind it now. It's gone from this horrible version of self-sacrifice to, like, he's found a better vision to follow. So, the bad men do get defeated in that movie, but it's not like all the men were evil. Some of them were good. Some of the ones we thought were evil turned out they needed the right vision, and all of a sudden it would change them. They could be redeemed. They could become great. They could even become heroes, like Knox did. He was just desperately looking for some sort of meaning. He was pitiable. He was desperately looking for something to live for, knowing that he didn't have that long to live. He wanted some sort of hope for the future, and was exploited by someone who knew that need in him. So in this story, what you have isn't just like the defeat of strength, or just one strength overcoming another strength. It's that what we've learned, and it's not just the dangerous people were gotten rid of. Who's more dangerous than Max or Furiosa? But they're good dangerous. The examples of Max and Knox, who both come around and end up being so helpful, show that even some very, very dangerous people can become heroes if you can just inspire them to, if you give them something to live for and something to die for and something to fight for. In this story, good strength overcomes bad strength. Love overcomes selfishness. It overcomes it in the heart of Max. It overcomes it in the heart of Knox. Courage overcomes their fear. Knox loses his fear. He becomes less desperate and crazy. And when he dies, you can see there's a peace that he has at its death that he never had at any point before that. So the world needed Max and Furiosa to be dangerous, but it needed them to be dangerous to evil, not merely dispassionate or dangerous to whatever got in their way, which is how they started out. It needed them to become heroes, dangerous to evil, dangerous for good. It needed the cruelty and callousness and fear and selfishness to be won over and destroyed by love and care and protection. Um, and that's what happened. It's a moral victory. It's a moral victory is what drives this movie. Um, so, you know, the wives are an interesting example. They don't do too much fighting. In fact, they prevent, for example, Knox from being killed. And it's part of what's inspiring to him is that unwillingness to kill for just no reason, as if he didn't matter at all. It's their unwillingness to kill for no reason and their desire to see um, a better world come into existence. That's actually what makes the wives, I think, in many ways, the most dangerous characters of all. Because they're dangerous to the human heart. There's plenty of physically dangerous people in this movie, but the people who can transform the world because they can transform the people in it, because they have this vision, the idea is the far more powerful thing, is actually the wives. They represent a vision for a different kind of world and a different kind of relationships, one that isn't based on ruthlessness and selfishness and exploitation and cruelty and callousness and ugliness. Um, and that vision is so powerful that it takes over and conquers Furiosa so that she's willing to risk anything for that vision. And then Max, as much as he didn't want to get involved, he just wanted to get away. He finds he too is conquered by it. And then Knox, this person who's literally been trying to kill himself to capture them, he gets conquered by it too. These are the most dangerous people in the entire story is the wives. They don't have to shoot anyone. They don't have to kill anyone. The wives didn't merely defeat or destroy their enemies. Anyone could do that in that world. They did something much more impressive. They turned their enemies into a different kind of person. They brought them into their world. They transformed them. And they transformed them into someone who's then willing to die for them. Um, yes, because of what the world is, you need dangerous people like Furiosa and Max and Nox. But the wives didn't become like them. They didn't say that's the only ideal, to become like that. They didn't become like them. They changed them. The wives changed those people. They saved the dangerous people as much as the dangerous people saved them. The wives saved the souls of Nox and Max and Furiosa. They made them want to be good. And that's the kind of power that can't be. That's something bigger. That's a whole new transcendent kind of power. That's more the like the Christian religious vision of power. You'd say this idea of not a power of the sword, but a power of the spirit, something that changes you, that makes you capable of doing things you never knew you could do, that can actually conquer your heart. And that's what I like about this story. It really is a moral victory. Yes, it's just one giant chase scene. Yes, it's this crazy post-apocalyptic thing with guys jumping around playing the guitar, and that's a lot of the fun of it. A lot of it is even the fun of just like seeing this totally insane, horrible, violent world. There is a certain amount of fun to that. But deep down at its core, it's actually reaching to the true classic hero story. It really is a very old-fashioned story. It's a very traditional story. It's a chivalric sort of story, and that's what I like about it. And I think that's why it's so powerful. It's not just that it's amazingly well made, the action's incredible. So much of it is done with practical effects, which has so much more impact. It's almost unbelievable how much more of an impact it has when you're really seeing these things happen. And it shows that things don't have to be too complex. You can do an enormous amount with visual storytelling and just letting your characters think about it. And as I say, there's a lot to think about in this movie. If you really want to think about it, the movie just doesn't spend a lot of time blabbing it at you, but it's in there. This is a classic hero story to stand there with all the hero stories we've had for centuries. And that is why I like it. That's all for today. We'll see you next time.